Welcome to this edition of Whiskey WealthTech. This is our first new episode on our new channel. I'm your host, Alex Serman, Managing Director of Wealth and Institutional here at First Rate. Today, I am joined by Mouctar Bah. Mouctar, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Alex. And for me, it's also an honor to be here today. Why? Because, again, you are calling from, let's say, in the United States, in the deep South, or I don't know, in Texas, and I'm calling from Brussels, at the heart of the European Union. So, I mean, for me, it's a pleasure to be here today with you.
Absolutely. So another international episode for us, hence why we're here online. And so today we'll be talking about, Mouctar, your involvement with the Brussels Africa Hub, which is a very unique organization helping facilitate investment and economic trade across many regions that we'll be talking about today. And so since we'll be talking a little bit about the US, Europe, but primarily Africa, our drink of choice today is actually going to be coffee. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why we're drinking coffee and what makes that important for today's episode?
So yes, Alex, as you know, I mean, the theme of your episode is whiskey. But I thought maybe when we talk about Africa, we have to say, okay, a continent that is very rich, very, very wealthy, because we are talking about wealth tech here. And actually, the whole world today consume that coffee without knowing what the roots of that coffee is. And the African continent, just like, let's say, if we say that the root of humanity is also on the African continent, and then I can tell let's say, your viewers of this episode, actually the coffee has its roots on the African continent as well, and within that African continent, also in a specific country called Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is, let's say, a country of 120 million inhabitants approximately, and actually the second most populated country on the African continent. So yes, wealth creation, population size, very young population. I think coffee history and combined with this element, so we can we have enough ingredients to talk about, let's say, wealth while staying awake.
Absolutely. And so today I'll be drinking an Ethiopian single origin coffee from Oak Cliff Coffee Roasters. So this is one of our local coffee roasters from Dallas. And so one of the interesting things they do is not only do single farm origin, they're very transparent about where they get their beans from, but they even create long-term relationships with the farmers that they're working with. And so if you go on their website, you can see biographies of the farmers that they're actually working with. And so it is very unique and fits in well with the episode of building those long-term relationships globally to create a product that's really incredible. And so I've got Ethiopian coffee, but brewed here in Dallas. And so Mouctar, what are you drinking today?
Actually, I will be drinking coffee from Burundi. So I don't know if it's visible here enough. So Burundi is a country located in Eastern Africa. And why I took this coffee with me, because it has also a link with Ethiopia at the same time. Because so when you talk about the Nile, one of the longest rivers in the world, which is everyone knows about Egypt. So how important the Nile is for the history of Egypt. But actually, according to ongoing research, the let's say the source of the Nile River is located in Burundi. And Burundi has actually a similar, let's say, from a geological point of view, similar, let's say, there are similarities between Ethiopia and Burundi. That's why I thought, okay. And at the same time, today, let's say, Ethiopia is highly dependent on the Nile River as well for its economy. They are building the biggest hydropower on the African continent. And that's on the Nile River. and which tells you actually when you grow your economy, you have this young population, you need a lot of energy. So especially in the world of AI, so a lot of energy required. So what these guys are doing, actually, they are using the Nile River to generate green energy, let's say, and kind of power a whole economy and also actually a whole region. So that's why I brought with me Burundi coffee today, the source of the Nile River. And that's what I'm drinking.
That sounds good. Well, then let's take a sip then. So cheers.
Cheers to that.
This is a nice change of pace for these early morning episodes. So now we've delved into our coffee. We're a little bit awake. So let's talk a little bit about what is the Brussels Africa Hub. And so can you tell us a little bit about, what is the organization? How did you get started? And, what are the goals for the organization?
So the Brussels Africa Hub, actually here there are three words: Brussels, Africa, and the hub. And each of them has their own meaning. So Brussels means actually Europe as a continent, and Africa as a continent. And hub means we are anchored here in Brussels, let's say the capital of the European Union. That's why the word is, instead of calling Europe Africa Hub, we decided to call it the Brussels Africa Hub. And the reason is simple as well. Everyone who refers these days to the European institutions, they talk about Brussels. Brussels said this, Brussels said that. So we said, okay, Brussels is replacing Europe as a continent as such. So we chose the word Brussels. And at the same time, now I explained here the word Brussels Africa Hub, but the founding members of the Brussels Africa Hub also represent both continents at the same time. So myself, I have my roots from West Africa, a country called Guinea-Conakry. It's a neighboring country of Senegal, because I think that one is the most known. And so, but I grew up here in Belgium and the Dutch-speaking side of Belgium. And now you have others like coming from Burundi, Rwanda, DRC, Congo, DRC. We all met here in Brussels. And we all come from the banking and the finance industry. And next to that as well, you have really Belgians, Europeans who've been born here, grew up here. And they also said, okay, I'm quite interested in this project that's been presented here to me. That's how we ended up 8 years ago in 2000, almost, let's say 2016, 2017, launching this project. But now you ask me, what's the project itself? What's Brussels Africa Hub is all about? I could summarize it only in one sentence for you. It's what I call the frictionless flow of capital between Europe and Africa and vice versa. So our aim is truly to see capital moving across these two continents without friction. In other terms, frictionless flow of capital. So, and the reason why I talk about capital, and because as a student, I came across different theories, and what the theory that I kind of found that is prevailing and engagement between Europe and Africa was aid, and I said I cannot accept that. Aid for me, that's an insult actually. Aid. We as a, let's say, Afro-European, meaning both being part of both worlds, it's better for me to kind of come up with a alternative solution, which is fundamentally capital market-based solution. So that's how the Brussels Africa Hub came in being. It's really based on, let's say, university ideas. And I, through, let's say, my after I started my career, also I met other friends that was kind of also struggling with exactly the same thought as I was. And I managed to join these people together, and we built this organization. We are an international non-profit organization, meaning we kind of, everything what we do, we are not doing it for profit as such, but it does mean, so our members are for profit. Everyone who's member of our organization, they are for profit organization. And we just try to enable this ecosystem as such, investors can find their way toward the African continent, but vice versa as well. Africans who manage to generate wealth on the African continent and would diversify away from the African continent, they can also find their way to the European continent, and why not to the US market as well. So that's how the Brussels Africa came in being.
Okay. That, I mean, I think that really fits in well kind of with a lot of the things that I've seen and heard, and alignment with the best way to, help people and, grow communities, grow economies is through business rather than just through, you know, giving things away. And so I you know, also studied economics, did all that. And I mean, I think that that fits in really well. And that's a kind of a mission that a lot of people can support and get behind, that it's not just investment from Europe into Africa, but vice versa as well. So you're really opening up that flow of trade to be able to, facilitate each of those economies growing through the ability to open that up. And so, what are some of the initiatives that BAH has to help facilitate that? So, what are you doing to create those win-win scenarios for both Europe and Africa through the programs and the initiatives that you guys lead?
Yes, in order to achieve the goal that we have set, which is a very long-term goal, which it's we kind of built around 4 pillars. So we kind of said, okay, in order to kind of attract investment on the African continent, because again, maybe I didn't tell you that, but there's even a history behind it, a headline from the Wall Street Journal back in 2017, which was stating, it was KKR. KKR was starting to engage on the African continent. As you know, KKR is one of the biggest US private equity firms. But actually, in 2017, I read this Wall Street Journal articles stating KKR is disbanding its team on the African continent. Why? Because they couldn't find, let's say, investable projects that meet their requirements. So that's why we said, okay, we see this a project or a deal flow issue on the African continent for these big US private equities. I need as organization contribute in solving that problem through one of our main pillars, which we call capacity building. Capacity building is actually means how we can engage with the financial sector on the African continent. So the senior managers within the financial system, the financial sector. So meaning by that, the banks and the whole ecosystem, and contributing and level playing field. I mean by that kind of and making sure that the set of skills they have on the African continent are exactly the same as those big investors. I call them the global investor as such. So they can go in the African continent, find exactly the same set of skills. So they have the same dialogue. Because one of our analysis was KKR came to Africa. They couldn't find these investment opportunities because they most probably they couldn't find the right people with whom they could go and seek for those deals on the African continent. So they came up with their own teams and set up teams. Importing teams. No, you have to work with local teams. But again, that's why we partner with one of the best known business schools in the world called INSEAD. And with INSEAD, we managed to train above 50 senior executives on the African continent active in the banking and the finance industry to make sure that they, as financial institutions, leaders of the financial institutions, they can help in contributing and building deal flows on the African continent. So that's the pillar, let's say one of the main pillars of the Brussels Africa Hub. And next to that as well, we have another pillar, which is also as important as the first one, which is the business networking. Meaning by that, we have to build a platform, an environment in which those senior executives on the African continent can also meet their European counterpart, and why not the US counterpart as well, in the same setting and speak exactly the same language. So that's why we launched in Cape Town, South Africa in 2023, September, our what we call the Europe-Africa Impact Investing Summit, in which we managed to gather, sizable portfolio managers
Hmm.
based in Europe, mainly in Luxembourg. A fund, as you know, Luxembourg is a fund hub of Europe. We managed to kind of bring some of them with us to Cape Town, just to spend a full day and discussing about wealth management, discussing about deal flow generation, and what are really needed to unlock this big potential of the African continent. So we managed really to bring senior executives for a full day in Cape Town, which is a very nice deliverable for us. And I'm very, really, honestly speaking, very kind of proud of that deliverable. That was, and it started like that, and then we keep on moving, because we try also, now I'm coming to the third pillar, to engage with the policymakers on both sides, on the European continent and on the African continent. And next, so what we launched here in Brussels on a quarterly basis, we organize a breakfast in which we invite diplomats from different African countries to meet with business community here in Europe, and that's working very well as well. So that's that pillar of policy engagement. It's also needed, and it works. And then finally, and maybe that's also the fourth pillar and the whole process, what we call research. We need also to do research and provide insight on the African market. That's also, and not later today, even one of our advisory board members and also one of our funding members, Jean-Julien Ilunga and William Mackenzie. William is a US citizen, and who was actually involved with the Brussels Africa Hub from day one already. Is one of our really key pillars within the Brussels Africa Hub, and he's based, as we speak today, in Libreville, Gabon, which is located mainly on Central Africa. And so the co-author today, an article which we published on our website on, let's say, how can, let's say, sub-sovereign entities can also access the capital market in order to invest in highly needed local infrastructure in order to attract more capital in their regions. So it's a very nice article. I advise everyone to go to our website and read the article. It's well written. So these are the kind of the pillars we are focused on. And yeah, definitely we think we should arrive to the fundamental aspect of whole this story is the investment and advisory, because at the end of the day, we have to facilitate this capital flow, which means we have to build the right ecosystem of those who can help investors from end to end to execute their investment, which is today, if you look at our membership, or let's say the members of our organization are mainly corporate lawyers, corporate tax lawyers, investment bankers. So all this type of community is there. And then you have the likes of your firm, First Rate, that comes really with a tech solution. And that's highly needed. And again, why is it highly needed? Like I stated in my introduction, the African continent is a young population, very young. And today we are heading toward a 1.4 billion people on the African continent. As we speak, we are around 1.2 billion, and by 2030 we will be around 1.4 billion already, which means you will have more people living on the African continent than in China. So, and yes, that's a hard reality, and also very young populations, because the average age is around 25 years on the whole African continent. So tech is something that they will kind of take ownership of. So we just need firms like yours to come and explore the market, and you will see by yourself as we go that the young population, they are there to take ownership of that tech and make kind of a leverage to get people out of poverty and grow the economies at a lightning speed. And I'm highly convinced about that.
So BAH is really, you're the interconnective tissue helping, be that link between investors, between policymakers, between these different financial institutions, and really helping navigate how to invest from Europe or the US into Africa, and then from Africa back into Europe. And because, to your point with KKR, they just didn't have the right connections, potentially, weren't able to, meet the right people to be able to make those kinds of deals. And so BAH is really there to help firms that are members meet the right people, get in front of the right spaces, create events to, provide that engagement and really build those relationships to allow for that, kind of fruitful, nurturing of business to your point, then take what is a extremely fast growing economy, extremely young economy, and help really build wealth in Africa for Africans. So
Absolutely.
that's pretty incredible.
That's actually you summarized perfectly, Alex. That's it. And yeah, again, for any sensible investor, long-term investor within the European and the US as well, if you want to kind of allocate on the long run your wealth, start looking toward the African continent. That's my
Absolutely.
advice.
Absolutely. And so you've mentioned First Straight is now a new member of the Brussels Africa Hub starting now in 2025. And so, you've mentioned there's a couple different types of firms that are members, mostly lawyers, some investment banks, but now as a US based wealth management technology solution, we seem to add, bring a few new kind of key aspects to the group that sound like they'll be adding value. And so what is it that you're hoping to see kind of as the, one of the founding members of BAH, First Street bring both from a kind of US perspective, but then also from that wealth management technology perspective? What are you hoping to see over the next year or so with us being members?
Actually, I look at from the angle of killing two birds with one stone, if I can use that sentence. Why? Because
You may.
First Rate is servicing the US, the global, let's say, wealth management industry, which means you have a whole ecosystem around you. So if we manage to convince First Rate to engage on the African continent, it's easier, much easier than to convince your client to follow you. You see? So for me, it's a tremendous achievement to have First Rate join the Brussels Africa Hub as a company. And next to that as well, you are bringing that US element into what they call the Holy Triangle. Because again, if you look at to Europe, Africa, the US, they share the same culture unto a certain extent. If you go to the African continent, whether people speak French or English, most of the countries that speak English. So it's the prevailing lingua franca in the African continent. So on top of that, many, let's say, Africans reside in the US, which means today, those living in the United States are kind of their remittances, so the money they are sending back to the African continent is part of the GDP of many African continents today, and it's significant. So meaning, and the same thing is happening in the Europe side as well. So the portion, let's say, the number of people like me living here in Europe, you are and contributing and developing the African economies through our monthly remittances that we are doing is kind of, it's significant for these economies. So if now we can combine Europe, US, and bring that pool toward the African continent, I think as an organization, we have reached our goal, which is kind of frictionless of flow of capital, organizing it and not only between Europe and Africa, but also where the other pool of African diaspora is living, which is the United States of America. So then we think it's a win-win as well, because again, the US economy, the European economies, they do need the natural resources that reside on the African continent. Because when you talk about semiconductors, so third generation of semiconductors, workforce, which is heavily dependent on critical minerals. And most of those critical minerals are in the African continent. Same thing. And yeah, I mean, even, yeah, also young population that can also kind of, even without leaving the African continent, still contribute and developing both the US and the European market. Why? Because companies like yours or others can outsource certain activities, which will be in terms of labor and also, let's say, labor price or and the quality of delivered work. If you can match those two, I think Africa could be one of the most competitive places to outsource certain activities for many Western companies as well, because Southeast Asia, China, it will become by default more expensive as we go, which is normal. It's just a dynamic like that. But Africa, with its young population, again, highly educated, and that take ownership of this new technology thanks to the AI. So I see, I mean, again, so the African continent can contribute twice and growth of the both US and European economies through, number one, making critical materials that is required for high tech more accessible to those economies, and also European companies, US companies outsourcing, let's say, or nearshoring or friendshoring, however you call it, to the African continent with its youth. I mean, again, it's a huge win-win on both sides.
Absolutely. And so with that, you've kind of mentioned, in the next 5 years or so, the population is going to increase from 1.2 billion to 1.4 billion. What other trends are you expecting to see, on the African continent in the next 5 years that are going to change how BAH may do some of their initiatives, or some of the things that people that are wanting to invest in Africa should be on the lookout for?
So so the next 5 years, I think infrastructure will matter a lot on the African continent. So both on data centers, let's say, because data need to flow, because whenever we talk about capital, it's also about data. So we will see a lot of investment around digital infrastructure in general, energy infrastructure, and also local manufacturing. I mean, processing of minerals, because I mean, the type of minerals that being shipped, even though I spoke about the minerals, the critical minerals earlier, but it's not the aim to kind of dig it and put it in a boat and bring it to the other side of the world. No, it's digging, processing, and then add value to it and then ship it away. But if not, I mean, more and more countries going to operate like that. In Indonesia, if I am a European or a US player, I would ask them, or I would recommend them to look toward Indonesia to see where Africa will be in 5 years from now on. Why? Because again, ask Apple and Google what they are facing at this moment in that country in terms of local content, and I think it's fair to say so. The local content and local processing, adding, let's say, or the downstream economy is the way forward on the African continent. And in the next 5 years, you will see more of that happening, downstream economy.
Okay, that's good to know. So my final question then for you, you've given us tons of great information about BAH, what, you guys are doing, what you're hoping to achieve. So as one of the founding members of the organization and as the president, what legacy do you want to leave? Whenever it could be many, many years in the future, whenever you decide to step away, what is one or two things that you're really hoping to leave behind as a legacy with this organization?
Actually, my let's say the Brussels, let's say the why of the Brussels Africa Hub disappears. So it's not needed anymore to talk about capital market engagement. It's not more needed to. It speaks by itself. So my legacy as a co-founder of this organization, what my hope is definitely so the why of the Brussels Africa Hub becomes irrelevant from now and X number of years, and hopefully not so far distance in the future.
I like that. I like that answer. That you have an organization, you have a mission. Your legacy is you want that mission to be accomplished, and that's you don't need to have a specific organization to connect all these people, but that just capital markets have moved forward so much that the investment flow is frictionless and easy to get into. So that way we're not having to do these kinds of things. I really like that and appreciate that. Well, this has been an absolutely fantastic morning chatting with you, Mouctar. Thank you again so much for your time and your insight. And I look forward to working with you more over the course of the year and hope to have you back on Whiskey and Wealth Tech sometime soon.
Thank you very much for having me, Alex, and I look forward to a fruitful and again win-win collaboration between this holy triangle or the golden triangle, I put it like that. So on the one hand, you have Brussels. I would say US, but Washington, but let's call it just the US as such, not Washington. And as you know, the capital of Africa or the African Union is Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia, by the way. So I would have said Brussels, Washington, Addis Ababa as a golden triangle, but let's just say Europe, Africa, and the US as a golden triangle.
That works. Thank you again, and tune in next time for our next episode of Whiskey and Wealth Tech.